Britain won both world wars. It lost its empire to the cost of winning them. No enemy dismantled what London had built over 3 centuries. The balance sheet did. You are watching a man at a conference table he did not design. Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, July 1944. His name is John Maynard Keynes, Britain's chief negotiator, the most influential economist of his generation. He arrived with a proposal that would preserve Britain's place in the post-war financial order. He is about to leave without it. What happened between London 1914 and this room? This is money memory, where the logic of power follows the money. Always has. Empires do not fall in defeat. They fall in the process of surviving. Britain's story proves it. London, 1914. The British Empire covered 13 million square miles. 1 in 4 people on Earth lived under its authority. The Royal Navy enforced a single doctrine. British warships must outnumber the next 2 largest fleets combined. No cargo crossed international trade routes without British ships, British insurance, or British permission. And the money, the pound sterling, backed by gold, was the currency of global commerce. If you needed a loan, you went to London. If you needed to settle a transaction, you settled it in pounds. Britain was not merely a military power, it was the operating system of the global economy. Then came the war that would hollow it out from the inside. June 1914, an assassination in Sarajevo. Within weeks, the continent mobilized. Britain entered, with treaty obligations, strategic logic, and no way to price what was coming. By 1918, the conflict was costing the British government £6 million per day. National debt before the war, £650 million. By 1919, $7.4 billion, 11 times larger. In 5 years. Britain did not have that money. It borrowed it, and only one nation had enough to lend. This is the first mechanism. War debt as power transfer. For over a century, Britain had been the world's creditor. Capital flowed outward from London into railways, mines, and governments across 6 continents. The direction of that flow was the source of British leverage. In 1915, with gold reserves drained and the budget collapsing, Britain turned to America. J.P. Morgan arranged a $500 million loan from American banks and investors, then another. Then another. By the end of the war, the directional flow of global capital had reversed. In less than a decade, the world's largest creditor had become a debtor. Britain owed America, not the other way around. In finance, direction is everything. American industry had run at full capacity supplying the war effort. American banks had replaced British banks as the source of international credit. The United States entered the 1920s as a net creditor nation for the first time in its history. The mechanism had transferred leverage, but it wasn't finished. This is the second mechanism, asset liquidation under existential pressure. September 1939. Germany invades Poland. Britain is at war again, before it has recovered from the first one. National debt at the outbreak, 140% of GDP. The treasury had not been rebuilt. The industrial base had not been modernized. The empire was restless and expensive to hold. Churchill became prime minister in May 1940. France had already fallen. Britain stood alone. He needed aircraft. He needed warships. He needed food. He needed America. The Lend-Lease Act passed in March 1941. The stated terms were simple. America would supply Britain with everything required. Payment would be settled later. What that settlement demanded was not advertised. Britain transferred military bases across the Caribbean and the Atlantic. It shipped gold reserves. It sold foreign investments, some accumulated over generations, at distressed prices, under time pressure, without alternatives. Centuries of compounded external wealth liquidated in 4 years. By 1946, Britain's national debt had reached 240% of GDP. The world's former banker was functionally insolvent. At Yalta, in February 1945, the three Allied leaders gathered to redraw the post-war world. Roosevelt set the agenda. Stalin negotiated territory. Churchill received the decisions. The hierarchy was no longer symbolic. It was structural. But here's the problem. The most consequential transfer was not military. It was monetary. Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. July 1944. 44 nations arrived to design the financial architecture of the post-war world. Keynes came with a proposal for a neutral international currency, the Bancor, controlled by no single nation. No country would hold structural advantage. It was the only arrangement that preserved any meaningful role for Britain. The American delegation, led by Harry Dexter White, refused. The dollar would become the world's reserve currency. All other currencies would be pegged to it. The dollar alone would be convertible to gold. Every nation conducting international trade would need dollars to do so. Keynes negotiated for weeks. He understood exactly what losing this argument meant. He signed. Britain had no financial leverage left to refuse. Two new institutions were established: the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, both headquartered in Washington, both structured around the capital of whoever provided most of it. The pound did not collapse overnight, but it no longer led. And if this sounds like a pattern, it is. 12 years later, Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal. Britain and France launched a coordinated military operation to retake it, without consulting Washington. President Eisenhower threatened economic sanctions. Sterling came under immediate pressure. Britain needed American financial support to stabilize its currency. It did not come. Prime Minister Eden resigned within months. British and French forces withdrew. The lesson was delivered without ambiguity. Without American approval, the answer was no. That was the last moment of the question. After Suez, there was none. What should you take from this? First, economic power is the foundation of every other kind of power. When the balance sheet weakens, military influence, diplomatic reach, and currency trust weaken behind it. Always in that order. Second, the costs of winning are just as capable of ending an empire as the costs of losing. Britain won twice. The bills arrived in 2 installments. Third, the transfer of reserve currency status is the final act. It doesn't announce itself. It happens in a conference room, in the language of technical agreements, signed by exhausted men with no remaining alternatives. Today, the United States carries more than $36 trillion in federal debt. Its share of global manufacturing has declined for decades. Other nations, larger in population, faster in growth, are expanding their monetary reach and their institutional alternatives. The mechanism does not change with the name of the empire. Empires rise when they generate wealth. They erode when they spend it faster than they create it. Britain did not lose its position because it failed. It lost because it could not afford to succeed twice. The bill does not arrive with a declaration of war. It arrives on a balance sheet, in a currency you no longer fully control, signed at a table someone else arranged. $36 trillion, built on a system negotiated at Bretton Woods in 1944. That's not history. That's the room you're standing in. Subscribe to Money Memory, because the patterns don't change, only the names do.